Baby steps.
This is Infants on Thrones.
I'm looking for the further light and knowledge Father promised to send me.
Baby steps. Baby steps.
Look for the good in everyone.
All right, welcome back to Infants on Thrones. I'm Glenn Ostland, and I've been sharing a book that I've written called You're Not Broken, Just Rewiring, which highlights my approach to therapy and overall mental health and well-being. Now, these next several chapters make up part 2 of the book, which I think will be especially interesting to those of you here at Infants on Thrones, because I put myself and my Mormon-formed mind under the microscope much more than I did in part 1. Here we explore why and how my brain was wired to find inspiration in channeled material of all places, my own embarrassment and critical approaches to all that, and the science I learned along the way to help me deal with that inner dissonance. Now, while I pretty much finished my writing of the book, I'm still in the process of adding endnotes to each chapter. And I'm looking for beta readers who would be willing to read the book and offer feedback that I can use for those endnotes. So if you'd like to be one of those beta readers, please reach out to me at infantsonthrones@gmail.com. I'll continue to release these audio-style chapters every other day throughout the month of July and into the first week of August. I hope to have the print version complete with endnotes all ready to publish by the end of August. So that's what we're doing. All right? Now then. Hold on to your hats and glasses.
This here's the wildest ride in the wilderness.
Chapter 11. The Science of Seth. Is it just me, or do some beliefs feel like they live in your bones, not your brain? Like, you didn't think them, they thought you? Or maybe they were you long before language, before logic, before any conscious defense? That's the spiral we're in now. In the gene keys, we saw code, transformation encoded in shadow. With Seth, we get voice, not just language shaping experience, but belief as biology. In Seth's words, you don't react to a world already made, you make it, thought by thought, tone by tone. He spoke of probabilities, parallel selves, and emotion as architecture. Feelings not as distractions, but as vibrations that sculpt matter. And the strangest thing is, modern science is beginning to agree. Belief as a predictive loop. Seth said, you create your own reality. Not metaphorically, mechanistically. Belief in this frame isn't a thought. It's an organizing principle, a filter through which experience takes form. Neuroscience calls this predictive processing. The brain isn't passively recording the world, it's guessing, constantly. It projects a model of what it expects to happen, then checks that against incoming data. But when the model is deeply entrenched, I'm unsafe, I'll be abandoned, I'm a failure, your system will filter out evidence to the contrary, not because it's deluded, because it's protecting you. Predictability feels safer than uncertainty, and that bias for familiarity, it literally shapes perception. Have you ever heard of confirmation bias? Well, this is it. When I first heard the phrase, you create your own reality, I ridiculed it. It sounded like magical thinking to me, another self-help spell conjured by those who hadn't studied the difference between correlation and causation. Jim Carrey once said he wrote himself a check for $1 million and later cashed it, as if the universe had taken his belief and made it real. I heard stories like that, and they rubbed against my training in sympathetic magic, Sir James Frazier's account of rituals where like produces like, where thoughts are treated as tools to shape the physical world. I'd lumped it all in with The Secret, and my brain called it nonsense. Spooky action at a distance, I thought, quoting Einstein's own discomfort with quantum mechanics. But then I started paying closer attention to the brain, and Anil Seth played a huge role in that. Anil Seth and the Controlled Hallucination. Anil Seth, a British neuroscientist and professor of cognitive and computational neuroscience at Sussex University, helped me, via YouTube videos, understand how perception actually works. And yes, I did catch the name thing. Anil Seth and Seth, Science Seth and Spirit Seth. They don't always agree, but they sure seem to hum in the same key. In a now famous TED Talk, Anil Seth said, "We don't passively perceive the world, we actively generate it." He describes perception as a controlled hallucination, a simulation generated by the brain, shaped by past experience, and constantly updated by sensory input. The red of the apple, the warmth of the sun, the sound of your name. None of it is out there in pure objective form. It's constructed within you. And that construction is not optional. It's how consciousness functions. That phrase, controlled hallucination, landed in my body like a key in a lock. Because what was Ra saying when it described third density as a veil? What was Spirit Seth saying when he insisted that belief sculpts experience? They weren't offering mysticism. They were naming architecture. Science Seth and Spirit Seth. Different modes, same frequency. Anil Seth explains that the brain uses top-down predictions to guess what's going on out there, and updates those guesses based on bottom-up sensory evidence. But the prediction always comes first. In other words, what you expect to perceive becomes what you perceive, unless the incoming data is strong enough to override it. You don't see reality. You see your model of reality, reinforced by belief, mood, attention, memory, culture, and psychological state. And that blew something open in me, because it meant Spirit Seth's message wasn't some disembodied spiritual abstraction. It was rooted in the machinery of consciousness. You create your own reality wasn't a wish, it was a wiring. Science Seth's work helped me grasp that selfhood itself is a controlled hallucination. The feeling of being you, a unified, separate, continuous identity, is constructed in the same way that color or sound is. It's guessed into being. Your sense of I is a model, maintained by interoception, your brain's internal sensing of your body, and updated by social and sensory feedback loops. So, when Spirit Seth, the entity, said, "You are not your role, you are not your past, you are not a fixed self," I heard it differently, not as poetry, as neurology. Anil Seth calls this the beast machine, the human body as an animal brain locked in a loop of prediction, shaped by survival, kept coherent by expectation. We don't perceive reality as it is, we perceive what it needs to be for us to feel safe, to stay alive, to make sense of what we've already believed. And when I absorbed that, I looked back on so much of my resistance with less judgment and more curiosity. From ridicule to resonance. Because I used to scoff at this idea that thoughts create reality. I'd hear people talk about visualization and manifestation, and I'd roll my eyes. I thought of New Age prosperity sermons, con artists, and sympathetic magic, and muttered, "No thanks, that's not science." But then I saw something that shifted me. Another YouTube video. It was Greg Gage's brain-to-brain interface experiment. A live demo. One person stood on stage with electrodes in her forearm, capturing the motor neuron activity involved in flexing her wrist. Another person sat beside her, wired to receive. When the first flexed her wrist, the system recorded the electrical signal, not the movement itself, but the intention to move, and sent it into the second person's body, and their wrist moved, involuntarily. Their brain hadn't issued the command, but their body obeyed. This wasn't a metaphor. It was a demonstration. Thought as signal, thought as action, not only within the self, but across boundaries. One mind triggering motion in another. It hit me like a tuning fork. You create your own reality isn't just about what you believe internally. It's also about what you emit, how your tone enters a room, a relationship, a body not your own. Maybe this is how nervous systems resonate. Scientists first observed this with mirror neurons in monkeys, neurons that fired both when a monkey performed an action and when it observed another monkey doing it. The same motor circuitry lit up as if itself were acting. Later studies found similar mirroring systems in humans, especially in emotional and social contexts. Have you ever yawned when somebody else yawns? It's why we flinch when someone stubs their toe, why we tear up when someone cries. Our nervous systems are wired to feel each other. We're not just individuals, we're participants in each other's reality loops. So, when Seth said emotions carry tone, that they sculpt the quality of experience, it wasn't just poetic, it was participatory. It meant we're all tuning forks, sending and receiving. That consciousness is not a closed circuit, it's a shimmering field. And the more I understood this, the more I reflected on how much tone I emit unconsciously. Tone shaped not by presence, but by fear, by shame, by roles I didn't know I was still performing. Personal myth, predictive mind. When I was 19, I went to Japan as a missionary. Before we left, there was a slideshow in Provo, some kind of folk revelation disguised as a history lesson. We were told that the Japanese people were descended from the lost tribes of Israel, that the Torii Gate mirrored the blood-marked doorposts of Passover, that the Mikoshi resembled the Ark of the Covenant, that Shinto temples followed the blueprint of the Hebrew tabernacle, and something inside me lit up. Then I saw patterns everywhere. I'd see the word samurai and think Samaria. I wasn't just observing, I was confirming. My brain wasn't neutral, it was predictive. It was looking for what I had been primed to find. So then the people I met weren't other, they were prophecy being fulfilled, and I was the fulfiller, the sacred thread, the chosen link. That wasn't stupidity. It was an ancient, evolved nervous system doing exactly what it designed itself to do. Years later, writing my master's thesis in folklore, I realized I hadn't been studying objective history, I'd been participating in myth building. Not doctrine, but function. The myth functioned to justify religious colonization, to make missionaries feel empowered, to help converts feel claimed rather than displaced. Because to the Japanese convert, if these stories were true, they weren't rejecting the faith of their fathers. They were reclaiming it. At the time, I thought I was learning truth. And in a way, I was. A truth of my own creation. A brilliantly manufactured hallucination. A controlled one. An architecture of expectation that organized reality around a belief system I didn't even know I was modeling. Spirit Seth helped me name it. Science Seth helped me map it. Broken versus rewiring. So what kind of reality do you create when you believe you're broken? You create one where every misstep confirms the flaw. Every relationship becomes a test you're doomed to fail. You distrust joy because you assume it won't last. You reject compliments because they don't match the internal map. Broken becomes a belief that filters perception, just like unsafe, unlovable, or too much. And that belief doesn't just live in your head. It lives in your cells, in your posture, in your breath, in your digestion and muscle tone, in the way your nervous system braces against life instead of leaning into it. But what happens when you shift that core belief? When you stop telling yourself, I'm broken, and instead whisper, I'm rewiring? Suddenly, setbacks become signals. Not proof of failure, but feedback from the system. Your emotions aren't malfunctions, they're messages. Pain becomes context, not condemnation. You stop asking, what's wrong with me, and start asking, what's shifting in me? And that shift changes what your brain predicts, what it looks for, what it believes is possible. That's not delusion, that's neuroplasticity. Belief isn't superstition, it's signal. And you get to choose the signal you follow, if you're listening and paying attention. Otherwise, it just happens. Thought is a biological event. To Seth, thought is vibrational. That might sound poetic until you understand the mechanism. A thought fires a neural network. That network releases neurotransmitters. Those chemicals don't just stay in your head, they travel. They shape inflammation, digestion, immune function, muscle tone. Even gene expression is influenced by the emotional context in which your cells operate. That's not mysticism. That's psychoneuroimmunology. That's epigenetics. So when Seth said, your thoughts create your body, your future, your world, he wasn't casting spells. He was describing physiology before the science had a name for it. But I didn't always see it that way. For a long time, I mocked anything that looked like symbolic ritual, especially when it came with glossy promises of transformation. I remember when Cammie invited me to read a book about gratitude. Her therapist had recommended it to her years ago. She loved it, and I recoiled. It was by the same author as The Secret. Strike one. Early on, the book suggested carrying a rock in your pocket, a gratitude rock. Each morning, pick it up and say something you're grateful for. Each night, do the same. And I thought, are you serious? To me, it sounded like sympathetic magic again, ritualized thinking, mistaking the symbol for the thing. I remembered Jean Baudrillard's work on simulacra, something I read in graduate school, how humans easily confuse representation with reality. The flag becomes the country, the cross becomes the faith, a rock becomes a portal. I rolled my eyes. But during this time, I was also reading Inner Size, a book on neuroplasticity, and that helped me see it differently. The rock wasn't magic. It was a cue, a neural anchor, something to focus on, a rhythmic, tactile reminder, a sensory pattern designed to shape attention. And the moment I realized this, I laughed. I knew from my dissertation research on humor studies that often laughter indicates a sudden realization of a sudden imminence, a sense of superiority. In other words, my conscious awareness became superior to my unconscious programming. The shadow was breaking through the soil and reaching toward the gift. Because in that moment I realized that my judgment had been shaping my reality just as much as someone else's faith might. I wasn't above the spell. I was casting my own, one of resistance, ridicule, and protective distancing. And simply noticing that gave me space. The judgment didn't vanish, but it loosened. I could see the wiring beneath it, and I could choose to shift my response to it. Symbol is not decoration, it's direction. Spirit Seth taught that dreams, symbols, and rituals aren't decorations. They're interfaces, bridges between conscious and unconscious realms. Modern neuroscience says the same. Dreams consolidate memory. Metaphors activate both emotional and sensory networks. Symbols compress complex meaning into forms the body can feel. When I saw that torii gate in Japan and felt a flicker of divine lineage, it wasn't superstition. It was a signal. My nervous system was reinforcing the architecture of the story I already believed. This happens every day. A wedding ring, a uniform, a logo, a look. These don't just represent things, they do things. They activate memory, they trigger emotion, they shape interaction. That rock wasn't powerful because it was a rock. It was powerful because it was a symbol for my desire to create new pathways. A touchstone, a reminder that what we perceive shapes how we feel. Emotion tones and evolutionary divergence. Seth spoke of emotion tones, vibrational templates that shape how consciousness expresses life. Think of it like emotional DNA. Some beings, based on evolved experience, are tuned for harmony, others for vigilance, others for control. These tones aren't just moods, they're filters. They become entire realities. So when life starts to feel off-key, it might not mean something's wrong. It might mean you're out of tune with your original tone. Several of my male clients came to therapy carrying shame about pornography. Not all wanted to quit, but all of them felt off. Not because of moral failure, but because of mismatch. Their inherited beliefs, my desires make me bad, I'll never be loved if I'm honest, weren't just thoughts. They were postures. I could see it in their breath, their voice, their eyes. But as we explored new beliefs, like maybe I'm not broken, maybe I'm wired for connection, the tone began to shift. Some stopped watching porn, some didn't, but all began noticing what their bodies actually wanted. And that shift in tone changed everything. It changed their perception. It changed their sense of self. And that's what both Science Seth and Spirit Seth are pointing toward. That your experience of you is a living, shifting improvisation, an emergent resonance, and the tone can be tuned. Biology and belief. Enter Gabor Mate, a Hungarian-Canadian physician and trauma expert. Mate has spent decades working with addiction, childhood development, and the mind-body connection. His central insight is simple but profound. Trauma isn't just what happens to you. It's what happens inside you when connection is lost. When no one was there to help you hold your pain, your nervous system held it alone. And it adapted. It survived. But those adaptations can become prisons. He doesn't speak in densities or tone fields, but his work lives in the same frequency. Reading Mate gave me language for an ache I didn't know how to name. The part of me that was wired to serve, but buried in shame. The thought that love had to be earned. The thought that feared its own desire. My spirituality had lit up my reward circuits, but it had also trained me to collapse, to over-accommodate, to apologize for taking up space. Mate helped me see that pattern, not as pathology, but as memory. as an embodied strategy for survival, a story my cells had memorized. And just like Seth, he offered a new path, not by transcending the body, but by coming back to it. Seth said the soul seeks experience, not perfection. Mate showed me why. Because experience is how the system reorganizes. It's how meaning gets metabolized. And if you're willing to hold presence with what aches, the system knows how to shift. Cellular service to other. Your body doesn't need morality to be good. It just needs coherence. Your cells already know how to serve. They die when the system needs them to. They signal, adjust, collaborate. Even your breath syncs with another's in conversation. Your gut bacteria regulates your mood. Your immune cells learn from experience and remember. Service to other isn't just a spiritual principle. It's a learned biological imperative. And when you're stuck in chronic self-protection, your body doesn't punish you, but it notices. It starts asking, is this still our tone? And that's what Anil Seth's research reveals, too. That the self is not a fixed fortress. It's a feedback loop, one that's deeply relational. Your I is always in dialogue with the we. Your I is always in dialogue with the we. Your I, me, mine is always in dialogue with we, us, ours. I saw it once at church. Two strangers struck up a conversation after learning they were both from Orange County. They were so excited. Do you know this person? Have you eaten at that restaurant? Ever go to that store? They were lighting up, connecting, but nothing matched because one was from Orange County, California, and the other, Orange County, Indiana. They never clarified. They just kept bonding because they thought they shared a world. And in a way, they did. Their brains were constructing reality around a shared assumption. That glitch wasn't a mistake. It was a mirror. A very human moment of patterned perception, Sethian in every way. Because we don't completely live in a single objective reality. We live in a shimmer, a subjective, constructed simulation stitched from memory, meaning, and emotional tone. When function forgets its function. Back in Chapter 4, we said pain isn't a malfunction, it's a message. Here, we add, sometimes pain is what happens when a once helpful function loses context. A cell that forgets its system becomes cancer. A belief that once protected becomes a prison. An emotion tone that once helped you survive becomes a distortion. So don't just ask, what's wrong with me? Ask, what was this trying to do? And is it still doing that? Seth wasn't asking us to adopt better beliefs. He was asking us to feel differently, to stop mistaking the map for the territory, to remember that symbols are meant to point, not to replace. Because when we mistake the symbol for the shimmer, we lose flexibility, and thriving requires flexibility. Time as a feedback loop. Seth taught that time is simultaneous, that all moments exist together, and that healing now ripples backward and forward. Modern neuroscience echoes this in memory reconsolidation. When you visit a memory with new emotional context, your system doesn't just reframe the event, it rewires it. Your body doesn't distinguish between remembered pain and current pain. So when your nervous system reprocesses an old wound in a safe, present container, the past updates. The neural architecture changes. And when the architecture changes, so does your future. This isn't just emotional growth, it's structural transformation. Time loops, healing loops, memory loops. The story you tell about who you are now, reshapes the story you once believed about who you were then. Whimsy isn't weakness. Remember Leonardo, determinist Vinci, the painter who built the universe with perfect order until he got bored and added a shimmer of unpredictability at the tip of the brush? That shimmer, that's you. Not the design, not the brush, the wiggle. You don't have to force coherence. You just have to notice when it's been here all along, waiting beneath the beliefs you were handed before you knew you had a choice. Even the ones you mocked, even the ones you rolled your eyes at, even the gratitude rock. Because maybe it wasn't about the rock. Maybe it was about you. Maybe it was about giving your nervous system something solid to land on, something to remember. The return to tone. This chapter is a bridge between mysticism and mechanism, between Seth's whispers and science's wires, between what I used to judge and what I now hold with joyful curiosity. So, if you feel glitchy, foggy, off-key, ask, what tone am I living in? And who gave it to me? Because maybe the ache isn't dysfunction. Maybe it's memory. Maybe it's your system saying, this isn't our tone. Maybe your ancestors are still humming through your cells. This is who we were built to be. And we're still here. And we remember. Because we're not broken. We're rewiring. Always. The spiral so far. Chapter 7 opened the spiral with the raw contact, polarity, densities, and service as soul path. Chapter 8 brought Seth as invitation. Your beliefs sculpt reality. Chapter 9 introduced the gene keys, transformation coded in shadow. Chapter 10 grounded those insights in neuroscience and epigenetics. And here, in Chapter 11, we discover that belief isn't superstition, it's signal. And every thought carries tone. And every tone is a tool for coherence or collapse. That Anil Seth's controlled hallucination and Jane Robert Seth aren't opposites. They're partners in remembering. Next up, the science behind the raw contact. Let's spiral in.
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.